So I want you to picture yourself on a kayak. It's a quiet, crisp morning, maybe early autumn.
Oh, that's like the perfect paddling weather, honestly.
Right. The air has that sharp, clean bite to it, and the leaves are just starting to turn. You're paddling down this beautifully calm, relatively shallow stretch of the Potomac River in Maryland.
Specifically down in Charles County, right?
Yeah, exactly, right off Sandy Point,
Yeah.
in an area known as Mallows Bay. And the water is just like still,
Like glass.
like perfect glass. It perfectly reflects the trees on the shoreline.
Mm-hmm.
You're just enjoying the glide of the boat, listening to the birds, totally at peace. You are far removed from the noise of the city.
Sounds idyllic.
It is, until you happen to look down over the side of your kayak. You peer into that shallow, kind of murky water.
And that's when the illusion breaks.
Yeah, because it's one of those moments where your brain takes a second to process what your eyes are actually seeing down there.
It really is. It's jarring.
Because right there, just inches below the surface, stretching out way wider and longer than you can possibly comprehend, in that first glance, you see it.
The bones.
The massive, unmistakable, decaying skeletal remains of a gigantic wooden steamship. We're talking something nearly 300 feet long.
Which is huge when you're sitting in a 10-foot plastic kayak.
Right. So you keep paddling, your heart is beating a little faster now, and you look down again. And there's another one.
And another.
And another. You realize with this sudden, deep chill that you aren't just floating on a scenic river. You are floating directly over the skeletons of hundreds of sunken ships.
It is a staggeringly beautiful and eerie image. I mean, when we think of historical ruins, we usually picture things that are, carefully curated.
Like museums, velvet ropes.
Exactly. Artifacts behind glass in a climate-controlled room, or maybe ancient stone temples on a hill with a gift shop nearby. We absolutely don't picture a massive, submerged graveyard of early 20th century industrial might just sitting quietly in the mud.
Open to the elements.
Completely open to the elements of a Maryland bay. But that's exactly what you find at Mallows Bay. It just completely upends your expectations of what a historical site looks like.
And what it feels like to interact with it, too. I mean, you're literally floating through the ribs of dead leviathans.
It's wild.
And that is exactly what we're getting into today. We are taking a massive deep dive into Mallows Bay, sitting right there on the left bank of the Potomac.
We really are. We've pulled from a giant stack of government records, historical archives, ecological studies, and Wikipedia's extensive documentation on the site.
So much documentation.
Yeah, to piece together the story of what is officially recognized as the largest shipwreck fleet in the Western Hemisphere.
The largest in the entire Western Hemisphere. That's just the sheer scale of it is what catches most people off guard.
Yeah, we aren't talking about a couple of wayward fishing boats that ran aground in a bad storm in the 1800s.
No.
We are talking about an entire industrial fleet, a massive armada of American history left to rot in the mud.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive is to trace the bizarre, almost unbelievable life cycle of this so-called ghost fleet.
It really is unbelievable.
We want to figure out how a desperate, massive industrial wartime effort somehow mutated into a multi-million-dollar logistical nightmare for the U.S. government.
Which is a story in itself.
Oh, totally. And then how it became a fiery, apocalyptic environmental graveyard, and then in this wild twist of fate nobody saw coming, transformed into a thriving, federally protected natural sanctuary.
It's a story with so many twists. If you wrote it as fiction, people would say it was too unrealistic.
They'd say you were hacking the plot. But before we get into the real story, the verified history of these ships, we do need to clear the air about something.
Yes, very important.
Because the moment you start researching the phrase ghost fleet, the internet loves to throw some wild, unverified curveballs at you.
Yeah, this is a very necessary correction right at the top of the show. Because if you go tumbling down certain online rabbit holes or paranormal message boards...
Which we know you all love to do.
Which is fun, sure. But you might stumble across these elaborate legends claiming that there's a mysterious 19th century silent fleet of ghost ships perpetually floating somewhere off the coast of Vietnam.
Right, the Vietnam ghost fleet thing.
Yeah. People love a good maritime ghost story, especially one set in the distant past in the South China Sea, complete with fog and phantom crews.
It sounds cinematic.
It does. But if we look strictly at the verified historical and government records we've gathered for this deep dive, we have to put a hard, absolute stop to that rumor.
So it's just pure internet folklore.
Completely. I mean, the sources are definitive. There are no credible 19th century accounts of a massive silent ghost fleet off Vietnam.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a myth that likely grew out of a mishmash of different maritime legends and just got amplified by the internet echo chamber.
The internet does love a spooky boat.
It really does. But the only true verified ghost fleet of this specific massive scale is sitting right where you described, in Mallows Bay, Maryland.
Right in our backyard, essentially.
Exactly. And its origins have absolutely nothing to do with 19th century folklore, pirates, or phantom sailors.
So what does it have to do with?
It has everything to do with 20th century geopolitical panic and industrial desperation.
Okay, let's unpack this panic, because it completely sets the stage for everything that follows.
It really does.
We have to rewind the clock back to 1917. World War I is raging across Europe, and the United States has just entered the global conflict.
And suddenly, the logistical demands on the U.S. government are completely off the charts.
They need ships. They need an astronomical number of ships to cross the Atlantic, carrying troops, artillery, food, medical supplies, everything needed to sustain a massive war effort on an entirely different continent.
But they hit a massive, seemingly insurmountable roadblock.
Right, a critical civilization-level shortage of raw materials. Specifically, a severe lack of available steel.
Which is a huge problem. When you are fighting a mechanized world war in 1917, steel is the most precious commodity on Earth.
Right, everybody wants it.
Every ounce of it is being diverted. It's going into artillery shells, it's going into tanks, it's going into the railroads.
And critically, it's going into the essential, heavily armored naval vessels required for combat.
Yes.
Wait, like dreadnoughts, those massive, heavily armored battleships they were building at the time.
Exactly. Dreadnoughts, destroyers, cruisers, the tip of the spear for the Navy, those ships had to be steel.
You can't make a wooden dreadnought.
No, you absolutely couldn't compromise there. But the U-boat threat, the German submarines, was just absolutely decimating Allied merchant shipping in the Atlantic.
Sinking them left and right.
Sinking supply ships way faster than the world could physically replace them. So the United States Shipping Board Merchant Fleet Corporation is faced with this impossible mandate.
What do they have to do?
They have to build an emergency fleet of transport ships to cross the Atlantic, and they have to do it fast enough to outpace the U-boats.
But without steel.
Exactly. You have to do it without using the primary material used to build modern ships. You can't use steel.
Which forces them to take what feels like a massive technological step backward.
Right. A huge step back.
Because if they can't use steel, their only real alternative for a massive shipbuilding program is to pivot back to wood.
Yeah.
So they end up drawing up plans to build over 100 of these massive wooden steamships.
The crazy part about this is the sheer scale of the industrial pivot.
I can't even imagine.
Right. You have a modern government realizing that to win a mechanized 20th century war, they have to resurrect a completely outdated method of shipbuilding.
Wooden hulls.
Wooden hulls. But they have to supercharge it to an industrial scale that had never been seen before.
It sounds like a logistical nightmare.
Oh, it was an absolute nightmare. They weren't just building a few little schooners. They were frantically building massive wooden steamships, pouring incredible amounts of money, labor, and raw lumber into creating an armada.
An armada that was fundamentally anachronistic the very moment the blueprints were drawn.
Yes, they were building ships out of wood in an era of steel submarines.
That's just wild to think about.
And think about the infrastructure required. By 1917, the skilled labor force of master shipwrights who actually knew how to build massive wooden vessels had largely aged out.
Oh, or moved on to steel.
Exactly. The industry had already transitioned to steel. So the government had to essentially reinvent the wooden shipbuilding industry overnight.
Wow.
They had to fell thousands of acres of old-growth timber, transport it to newly hastily constructed shipyards, and train a massive workforce of carpenters to build ocean-going vessels.
It's the ultimate panic purchase.
It really is.
They are churning out these wooden steamships as fast as humanly possible, throwing money at the problem just to get holes in the water to support the war effort.
Whatever it takes.
But here is the ultimate punchline to this massive industrial mobilization.
The timing.
The war ends. November 1918, the armistice is signed, the fighting stops, and suddenly the United States government owns a massive fleet of brand new, completely obsolete wooden steamships.
It's tragic, honestly.
To put this in perspective, I was trying to think of how to explain this feeling of instant obsolescence.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine you are the CEO of a major tech company today. You see a massive global communications crisis coming, so you panic.
Right.
You invest your entire operating budget, literally billions of dollars into manufacturing 1 million top-of-the-line, perfectly functioning two-way text pagers.
Oh, no.
You build new factories, you hire thousands of workers, you churn out these pagers round the clock. And the very day the last pager rolls off the assembly line, another company unveils the first iPhone.
That is a remarkably apt comparison.
Right. Your pagers work perfectly. They do exactly what they were designed to do.
Sure.
But in the grand scheme of technology and market demands, they are instantly functionally worthless. Nobody wants them.
Nobody needs them.
The war is over, so the military doesn't need them. And the commercial shipping companies don't want them because, well, wooden ships are slower. They require more maintenance.
They can carry less cargo, too, because the wooden hulls have to be so thick.
Exactly. And they are competing against a massive surplus of modern steel ships that are now freed up from wartime duties.
Yeah, the market was flooded.
You have made a massive national-level investment in something that is entirely obsolete upon completion.
And it's a profoundly striking lesson in how rapidly the world can shift. You know, geopolitical needs, technological advancements, economic realities. They don't wait for your production cycle to finish.
They really don't.
The government invested heavily in a solution for an immediate, desperate problem, but by the time the solution was fully realized and the ships were actually built and ready to sail, the problem had vanished.
The U-boats were gone.
The U-boat threat was gone, and the technological standard had permanently moved on. Wooden ships were not going to be the future of maritime commerce or military transport in the 1920s.
Steel had proven its absolute dominance.
Absolutely.
So if you've ever watched your tax dollars go toward a massive failed infrastructure project, like a bridge to nowhere or a tech system that's outdated before it's even installed, this is the granddaddy of them all.
It really is.
This is the ultimate sunk cost fallacy brought to life on a massive floating scale.
Yeah.
Because once you have this massive fleet of over 200 wooden ships, you can't just pretend it doesn't exist.
You can't hide it under the rug.
You can't just throw a 280-foot wooden steamship in a municipal dumpster. You have to put them somewhere.
Exactly. Because an obsolete ship doesn't simply cease to exist when it is no longer needed. It remains a massive physical object that requires space, maintenance, and constant oversight.
So, the U.S. Navy takes one look at this wooden fleet and says, absolutely not.
Nope.
We do not want them. They're too slow. They are too vulnerable. They are of zero tactical or strategic use to us. Keep them away from our steel fleet.
It's someone else's problem.
Right. So the government, specifically the shipping board, has to find a parking spot for them.
Which isn't easy.
No. Initially, they decide to store a large chunk of the ships in the James River in Virginia. But the records show that just keeping these empty, useless ships parked in the river was costing the government an exorbitant $50,000 every single month.
Which was a massive amount of money back then.
Okay, I have to stop here and push back on this, because I know anyone listening is probably thinking the exact same thing.
What's that?
$50,000 a month. In 1920s money, that is a massive fortune.
It is.
Why on earth does it cost so much money to literally do nothing? If I park a broken-down car in a field and walk away, it costs me $0. Why does parking empty ships on the water cost 50 grand a month?
What's fascinating here is that it really highlights the stark reality of maritime storage versus terrestrial storage.
Okay.
We aren't talking about parking a few cars in a field where they just sink into the grass. The sheer physics and scale of the problem are staggering.
Right.
We are talking about roughly 230 massive vessels from the United States Shipping Board Merchant Fleet Corporation. That is an enormous amount of physical space taken up on a navigable waterway.
Right, they're basically clogging up an active river.
Precisely. They are posing massive navigational hazards. You cannot just drop anchor on 230 giant wooden ships, lock the doors, and walk away.
Because water moves.
Exactly. Ships on water are incredibly dynamic. They are subject to river currents, tidal shifts, relentless wind, and severe storms.
Oh, I see.
If you abandon them, their mooring lines will fray and snap, their anchor chains will rust and break, and if that happens, you suddenly have a 280-foot unguided missile drifting into active shipping lanes.
Crashing into things.
Colliding with bridges or smashing into operational commercial vessels.
So it's a massive liability issue.
A huge liability. So the government has to maintain a constant active monitoring presence. They need personnel like watchmen living on or near the fleet.
Just to keep an eye on them.
Right. They need tugboats on standby to wrangle any ships that break loose. They have to constantly check the moorings. Furthermore, wooden ships leak.
Oh, right. Wood expands and contracts.
It's just the nature of wooden hulls. They require constant pumping of the bilges. If you don't keep the pumps running, the ships will slowly fill with water and sink right there in the middle of the river.
Which would block the river entirely.
And that requires an incredibly expensive dredging and salvage operation to clear the channel. So you are paying for manpower, infrastructure, administration, fuel for the pumps, and emergency interventions.
All for ships you don't even want.
Exactly. It is a constant, unending hemorrhage of taxpayer funds.
So the government is just bleeding money every single day, staring at this fleet of wooden mistakes. They are desperate to stop the bleeding.
Panic mode again.
The sunk cost fallacy is finally worn off, and they realize they just need to cut their losses. They need an exit strategy, and fast.
Yep.
So they finally manage to orchestrate a desperate sale. They sell the whole lot of them to a private entity called the Western Marine and Salvage Company.
And for the government, this was likely celebrated as a massive bureaucratic victory.
Oh, they must have been throwing a party.
They offloaded a $50,000 a month liability. They washed their hands of the World War I wooden ship fiasco.
Not our problem anymore.
Exactly. But for Western Marine and Salvage, they were taking on a monumental task. The company's goal, of course, was to dismantle these ships and sell off whatever valuable scrap metal they could extract.
So like the engines and stuff.
Yeah, the boilers, the heavy iron fittings, the brass components, the miles of piping, the massive bolts holding the timber together.
But first, they have to physically move them. They can't just leave them in the James River where they're already causing problems and angering local traffic.
Right.
So Western Marine relocates this massive fleet. First, they tow them to a place called Widewater, Virginia. But that is only a temporary stop.
They run into issues there too, don't they?
Oh, big time. Protests from locals, environmental concerns even back then, and logistical hurdles. Ultimately, in 1925, they tow the entire fleet up the Potomac River to their final resting place,
Mallows Bay.
Mallows Bay.
Think about the spectacle of that relocation, towing over 100 massive, obsolete steamships up the river.
It must have looked insane.
It would have been this strange, almost mournful parade of industrial failure, slowly making its way to a shallow, muddy bay in Maryland. It would have taken weeks of coordinated tugboat operations, fighting the currents, navigating the bends of the Potomac.
And selling the ships to a salvage company was supposed to be the neat, tidy solution to this whole mess.
In theory.
The government is free and clear. A private company makes a tidy profit recycling the materials, and the ships disappear from the public eye. It's a win-win on paper.
On paper.
But as we are about to see, the salvage process itself turned into an absolute, unmitigated disaster for the company.
It is a textbook historical example of how a business plan that makes perfect sense on a spreadsheet can rapidly, violently unravel when it encounters the physical, muddy reality of the real world.
Which brings us to 1925. The ships are anchored in Mallows Bay. Western Marine and Salvage owns them. They are ready to get to work.
Let's do it.
And their big, brilliant strategy to salvage these ships is to subject the entire fleet to a massive intentional burning. They literally set the ships on fire, with the goal of burning them all the way down to the waterline.
That was the plan.
Wait, hold on. Let me get this straight. You are a private company.
Right.
You just spent a massive amount of capital buying a fleet of ships specifically to salvage the materials from them.
Right.
And your first major operational move is to set your own multi-million-dollar investment on fire.
That's the move.
How does setting your own ships on fire make any financial sense whatsoever?
I know, it sounds completely counterintuitive. It sounds reckless, maybe even like insurance fraud, until you break down the specific economics of the materials involved in 1920s salvage operations.
Okay, lay the economics out for me.
You have to understand where the actual liquid value lay in these vessels. The value was absolutely not in the wood. The wood was practically worthless on the salvage market.
Why? Wouldn't lumber be valuable? I mean, it's wood.
Not this lumber. It was massive, bulky, custom cut for shipbuilding, and incredibly difficult to transport.
Oh, I guess you can't just build a house out of curved ship ribs.
Exactly. Furthermore, it was saturated with salt water, coated in marine growth, and soaked in oil and coal dust from the engine rooms.
Ew.
Nobody in 1925 is clamoring to buy giant pieces of curved, toxic, waterlogged wood. The primary purpose of that wood had been rendered obsolete.
Okay, so the wood is literal garbage.
Right. The real tangible value, the stuff they could actually sell to a foundry for a profit, was hidden deep inside the ships. It was the scrap metal.
The heavy stuff.
We are talking about Massive triple expansion steam engines, the internal plumbing, the heavy iron fittings, the propellers, the shafts, and the thousands upon thousands of heavy bolts holding the wooden structure together.
So they needed that metal.
That metal could be melted down and resold relatively easily, but here is the massive logistical problem Western Marine faced. Extracting that heavy metal from the deep, dark bowels of a massive wooden ship by hand is incredibly slow, highly dangerous, and exorbitantly expensive.
Because they didn't have, like, modern hydraulic excavators or massive cranes that could just crack the ship open like a walnut.
Exactly. You would have to pay teams of men to painstakingly dismantle the ship piece by piece, unbolting massive timbers, hauling wood out of the way just to get down to the engine block.
That would take forever.
The labor costs of manual dismantling would completely eat up any profit they would make from selling the scrap metal. The margins were too thin.
So, from a purely cold, calculated industrial perspective, fire was the most efficient tool they had.
Precisely. Fire was cheap labor.
Wow.
By setting the ships ablaze and letting them burn down to the waterline, they let the fire do the arduous manual labor of removing the worthless wood.
It just vaporizes the problem.
The fire consumes the hull, the decks, the cabins, and what happens when a ship burns to the waterline?
It sinks.
Well, the water itself acts as a natural fire extinguisher.
Oh, right.
The bottom of the hull remains intact, but the valuable, heavy, fire-resistant metal components, the engines, the boilers, the heavy fittings, they fall down into that lower hull or are suddenly exposed and easily accessible.
Sitting right there in the shallow water.
Sitting right there, ready to be hoisted out by barges with cranes.
It is a brutal, scorched earth approach to recycling. It's effective, but it's violent.
Scary.
You just try to imagine the scene. Mallows Bay, November 7, 1925. The company waits for the right weather conditions, and then they light the match.
Moo!
Night is falling, and over 100 massive ships are burning simultaneously in the water. The smoke, the intense heat, the incredible noise of the massive wooden timbers snapping and collapsing into the river.
It must have been deafening.
It must have looked like the end of the world on the Potomac. You could probably see the glow from miles away.
It would have been a truly apocalyptic visual. Think of the symbolism of it, too.
Yeah.
An entire fleet built with the desperate hope of saving the world in a global war, ending its life in a massive, deliberate inferno in a quiet Maryland bay, just to scrounge a few bucks out of the scrap metal.
But here's the incredible twist. The tragic irony of this whole endeavor.
It doesn't work out.
Despite this drastic, seemingly ruthlessly efficient strategy to get to the metal, it does not save the company. Western Marine and Salvage Company eventually goes completely bankrupt.
Yeah, they totally folded.
The Great Depression hits, scrap metal prices plummet, the logistics of pulling the heavy engines out of the muddy bay prove way more difficult than anticipated, and they simply run out of money.
It was too much to overcome.
So what do? They just abandon the fleet right where it lies. They walk away, completely washing their hands of it, leaving the burned-out husks of these ships sitting in the mud of Mallows Bay.
It's a fascinating study in the unpredictability of markets and the sheer hubris of these massive industrial undertakings.
Hubris is the perfect word.
The irony here is incredibly thick. You have a fleet of ships that was willed into existence out of sheer economic desperation during World War I.
The desperate lack of steel.
Exactly. And then, less than a decade later, the remains of that very same fleet completely ruined the company that tried to profit from them, driven by a desperate need to extract that value.
It's cyclical.
The fleet was born out of an economic crisis, and it died, causing another localized economic crisis for the salvage company.
It is almost like the ships themselves were cursed with financial ruin.
They really were.
They bankrupted the government with exorbitant storage fees, and then they bankrupted the private company that tried to scrap them.
Bad luck all around.
So the 1920s close out with Mallows Bay looking like a literal post-apocalyptic ship graveyard.
Yeah.
Burned wooden skeletons, half submerged in the shallow water, completely abandoned to the elements.
Just left to rot.
And you might think, well, that is the end of the story. The ships are dead, the company is dead, let them rot in the mud and be forgotten by history.
But they aren't.
But history has a funny way of repeating its own desperate cycles.
Indeed it does. Because human memory is short, and a couple of decades later, the global geopolitical landscape shifts dramatically once again.
Here we go again.
The world plunges back into a total global conflict.
Right. It's the early 1940s. The globe is at war again with World War II.
And suddenly, Mallows Bay, this forgotten, burned-out, bankrupt industrial graveyard, becomes incredibly relevant all over again.
People want the metal again.
Yep. During World War II, the massive industrial juggernaut Bethlehem Steel arrives at Mallows Bay.
Okay.
And they don't just come to poke around the ruins, they actually build a massive salvage basin right there on the site.
Can you explain what a salvage basin actually is? Because when I read that in the sources, I pictured just a big concrete pool, but I imagine it's more industrial than that.
Oh, definitely. It's basically a massive engineered mud pit or a rudimentary dry dock carved into the shoreline.
Okay, so they dug it out.
Bethlehem Steel came in with heavy dredging equipment and dug out a huge basin connected to the bay. The idea is that you take these burned-out hulks that are sitting out in the water, you hook them up to massive winches and bulldozers, and you drag them out of the river into this basin.
Wow, dragging whole ship skeletons.
Once they are in the basin, you can block off the water, pump the basin dry, and now your workers have dry, stable access to the absolute bottom of the hulls.
To get the rest of the metal.
Exactly, to extract every last ounce of metal that Western Marine couldn't reach in the 1920s.
So their goal is to recover the remaining metal from the abandoned, burned-out ships that Western Marine had left behind. They're literally picking the bones of the 1925 salvage operation.
Exactly. And the deeply cyclical nature of human conflict and resource management here is just incredible. Let's trace the lineage of this specific metal.
Okay.
During World War I, a severe global shortage of steel forces the creation of a wooden fleet. Then peace comes, the wood is burned away, and the metal is deemed too difficult or too costly to fully extract by a bankrupt company in the 1920s.
Right, they leave it as garbage.
It's left as garbage. Fast forward 20 years, World War II erupts, the global demand for steel and scrap metal skyrockets to unimaginable heights once again.
Everyone needs metal.
They are running scrap drives across the country, asking people for their tin cans and old radiators.
Oh, I remember hearing about those.
So the economic equation completely flips. What was financially ruinous to extract in 1925 suddenly becomes economically viable and strategically necessary in the 1940s.
The desperation for metal is so intensely high that a massive corporation like Bethlehem Steel looks at a muddy bay full of burned 20-year-old wreckage and says, yes, there is enough value left in those rotted bones to justify mobilizing heavy equipment and building an entire salvage basin.
It really highlights how desperation redefines our concept of value.
It totally does.
In peacetime, during the Great Depression, that metal was garbage. It was a hazardous eyesore left to rust in a river.
Yeah.
In wartime, it is a vital, precious national resource worth building brand new infrastructure just to extract.
It is a powerful reminder that trash is a highly subjective concept.
Heavily dependent on the current state of the global economy.
And Bethlehem Steel isn't the only one contributing to this location's layered history.
No, they aren't.
Because when you look at the records of Mallows Bay, it is not just World War I ships down there.
There's more.
Over the decades, wrecks of various civilian boats have also found their way to the site. The bay effectively became a convenient, out-of-the-way dumping ground for unwanted maritime vessels of all kinds.
Which is pretty common for places like this.
The sources specifically mention a prominent ship known as the MV Accomac that is visible there among the ruins.
Yes, the Accomac. She was a steel-hulled ferry boat, completely unrelated to the World War I shipbuilding effort.
But she's there anyway.
But she ended up there anyway. And this happens because Mallows Bay evolved from a specific, dedicated dumping ground for one failed government project into a generalized maritime graveyard.
It became the place to dump your boat.
It's a well-documented phenomenon. Once a physical location is culturally coded as a place for abandoned things, once people see that it's already full of wrecks and nobody seems to care, it naturally attracts more abandoned things.
Like a magnet.
People think, well, if the government can dump 200 ships here, surely nobody will mind if I ditch this old ferry or this broken barge.
Makes sense in a weird way.
The MV Accomac and the other assorted civilian vessels add these rich layers of complexity to the site. It is no longer just a monument to a specific WWI panic. It becomes a generalized archive of various maritime failures, obsolete vessels, and unwanted boats spanning several decades of the 20th century.
I want you to really paint a mental image of this for yourself. Imagine you are walking the shoreline of Mallows Bay today.
Picture it.
You are looking out at the shallow mud and the tidal water. You are not just seeing the aftermath of one single event. You are seeing decades of completely different maritime histories literally layered on top of each other.
It's a collage.
You have the burned wooden ribs of WWI emergency transport ships sitting right next to the rusting steel hull of a civilian vessel like the MV Accomac. And all of it is framed by the massive earthen remnants of a WWII salvage basin built by Bethlehem Steel.
It is a physical, geographical timeline of 20th century industry, war, and abandonment, all sinking slowly into the exact same mud.
Just piling up.
Historians and geographers often use the concept of the palimpsest.
A palimpsest.
Yeah, a palimpsest is an ancient manuscript page, usually parchment, where the old writing has been scraped off or erased to make room for new writing, but faint traces of the original text still remain visible underneath.
Oh, that's a great metaphor.
Mallows Bay is a perfect geographical palimpsest. Every generation brought its own needs, its own desperation, and its own refuse to this one shallow bend in the Potomac River.
They tried to scrape away what was there before.
Like Western Marine burning the wood or Bethlehem Steel digging out the basin. But the traces of the past are never fully erased. They just stack on top of each other.
For decades, through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, this site was the ultimate symbol of industrial waste. It was the place where bad ideas, failed companies, and obsolete technologies went to die and be forgotten.
It was an eyesore.
It was viewed as a polluted, burned-out, rusted-over graveyard, a blight on the river. But, and here is where the story takes its most incredible, uplifting turn, nature has a very funny, very resilient way of dealing with human garbage.
This is perhaps the most profound and scientifically fascinating part of the deep dive.
I love this part.
The narrative shifts completely from a story of human hubris and industrial failure to a story of environmental resilience and ecological engineering.
Which brings us to the present day. If you go to Nanjemoy, Maryland today, you will find Mallows Bay Park. It is completely open to the public.
You can just go there.
Charles County operates it. There's a great little 0.8-mile trail that loops right around the park, giving you these elevated views of the salvage basin Bethlehem Steel built.
So you can see the history from the shore.
In 2010, the county even constructed a boat ramp and a pier specifically for recreational use to give people direct access to the Potomac River right at the site of the wrecks.
And that's where the kayaks come in.
But the real magic, the absolute breathtaking part of this story, is what has happened to the ships themselves. They haven't just rotted away into muddy nothingness.
No, they haven't.
They have transformed into a massive, thriving artificial reef that now hosts an incredible array of wildlife.
The ecological alchemy that has occurred over the last century is just astounding.
Alchemy is a good word for it.
When Western Marine burned those ships to the waterline in 1925, they left behind massive, complex wooden skeletons resting in the shallow, brackish water of the Potomac estuary.
Right.
Now, in the immediate aftermath of the fire, it would have been a toxic dead zone. Ash, oil, charred wood.
Gross.
But over the ensuing decades, those wooden ribs, those massive keels and beams, and the remaining metal structures became the foundational architecture for an entirely new ecosystem.
How does that actually happen? How does a burned piece of wood become a reef?
It's a process of ecological succession. The wooden structures sticking up out of the mud act as baffles. They slow down the tidal currents of the river.
And when water slows down?
When water slows down, the sediment it carries drops to the bottom. So over decades, these ships literally trapped sediment inside their hulls, creating these protected, shallow mini islands.
Wow, they built their own islands.
Then, seeds blown by the wind or dropped by birds take root in the decomposing wood and accumulated dirt.
Life finds a way.
You start getting vegetation marsh grasses, shrubs, and eventually even full-grown trees sprouting directly out of the decks of these sunken WWI ships.
That is exactly what makes the kayak trip so insane. You can actually take a canoe or a kayak like we talked about at the very beginning of the deep dive. You can put it in the water at that 2010 boat ramp, and you can paddle directly through the ruins of these WWI steamships.
You are inside the ships.
You are navigating your little plastic kayak through the decaying wooden ribs of a 280-foot vessel built for a global war.
It's surreal.
And as you paddle, you're not just looking at dead, barren wood. You are watching wildlife absolutely thrive on old military infrastructure. Plants are growing out of the wood. Fish are using the hulls for shelter. Birds are nesting on the exposed beams.
The ships have literally become the substrate for life. Nature took the ultimate symbol of human disposable culture, an obsolete, burned, abandoned war fleet, and utilized its complex physical structure to build a vibrant habitat.
It's amazing.
The intricate spaces between the wooden planks, the sheltered areas inside the decaying hulls, the rusted metal pipes, they provide perfect microenvironments for aquatic life.
Little safe havens.
Small fish, crabs, and amphibians use them to hide from predators, to breed, and to flourish in the calm water trapped within the hulls. And where the aquatic life gathers, the predators follow.
Naturally.
Mallows Bay is now renowned for its populations of bald eagles, osprey, blue herons, and river otters.
The river otters.
It is a complete, top-to-bottom ecological revitalization built entirely on a foundation of industrial ruin.
It is such a stark, beautiful contrast. Think about the life cycle of these ships.
It's quite a journey.
They completely failed at their original purpose of crossing the ocean for war. They failed at their second purpose of generating salvage wealth for a corporation. But they succeeded spectacularly, entirely by accident, at becoming a thriving natural reef.
The ultimate redemption arc.
And this transformation has not gone unnoticed by the authorities. This isn't just a local curiosity for fishermen and kayakers anymore.
No, it has received the highest levels of official recognition and protection from the federal government.
Wow.
And this raises an incredibly important question about how we, as a society, define heritage and preservation. The historical and ecological significance of what happened here became impossible for the government to ignore.
So what do they do?
On April 24, 2015, the bay was officially listed as an archaeological and historic district on the National Register of Historic Places.
That's a big deal.
That acknowledges the profound historical narrative of the site, the WWI origins, the 1925 salvage efforts, the layers of maritime history with the Accomac.
But it gets even bigger than that, because a few years later, on September 3, 2019, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, stepped in.
Yes, they did.
They designated 18 square miles of the Potomac River, with Mallows Bay right in the northeast corner of it, as the Mallows Bay Potomac River National Marine Sanctuary. 18 square miles, federally protected.
A National Marine Sanctuary designation is a massive deal. It puts Mallows Bay on par with places like the Florida Keys or Monterey Bay.
That's crazy to think about.
And what is so uniquely fascinating about this designation is the validation of the site's dual identity. It is not just protected because of the history of the 230 United States Shipping Board vessels.
Right.
And it is not just protected because it is a nice habitat for bass and osprey. It is protected specifically because of the unprecedented, inextricable intersection of the two.
You can't have one without the other.
Exactly. It is a sanctuary where human history and natural ecology have physically merged. You cannot separate the ecosystem from the shipwrecks. The wrecks are the ecosystem.
It is a powerful lesson, I think. Think about what this place was in 1925. It was literally considered the ultimate trash of the U.S. government.
It was an embarrassing mistake.
It was a massive, embarrassing mistake that they burned and walked away from because it was too expensive to deal with. And now, less than a century later, that exact same trash is a federally protected national treasure.
It's beautiful.
It is a marine sanctuary on par with some of the most beautiful natural reefs in the country. It really makes you rethink what we consider valuable and how time and nature can completely redefine a landscape if we just get out of the way.
It is a profound testament to the incredible healing capacity of the natural world, provided it is given the time and the raw materials to work with, even if those raw materials are the burned, toxic husks of obsolete steamships.
Okay, let's wrap our heads around everything we've covered today, because we spanned a century of history.
We covered a lot of ground. Or water, I guess.
We started in 1917 with a panicked, desperate building initiative during World War I, where a lack of steel led to the frantic creation of over 100 massive wooden steamships.
Ships that were instantly obsolete the moment peace was declared in 1918.
Right. That massive fleet became a $50,000 a month burden on the government, parked in the James River, causing massive headaches and navigational hazards.
Which then led to the desperate sale to Western Marine and Salvage.
The grueling relocation to Widewater and then Mallows Bay.
And the apocalyptic, intentional burning of the entire fleet in 1925 just to get to the scrap metal, a move that ironically bankrupted the very company that lit the match.
Then the relentless cycle of history brings World War II in the 1940s, and Bethlehem Steel arrives to build a massive salvage basin, picking over the remains out of a renewed desperation for metal for the war effort.
The site slowly accumulates even more history with civilian wrecks like the ferry MV Accomac.
And finally, we arrive at the present day where a 2010 boat ramp and a 0.8-mile trail allow you to intimately access a site that was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2015.
And designated an 18-square-mile NOAA National Marine Sanctuary in 2019.
It is the ultimate journey from a panicked industrial blunder to a vibrant, federally protected nature reserve.
It is a remarkable trajectory, and it leaves me with a final thought, something for you to really chew on long after we finish this deep dive.
I'm ready.
We spend so much of our time, effort, and money in modern society trying to preserve history exactly as it was built.
Yeah, keeping things pristine.
We meticulously restore old buildings to their original pristine condition. We put ancient artifacts in climate-controlled glass cases. We try desperately to freeze time. But Mallows Bay proves that sometimes the most beautiful, the most vibrant, and the most ecologically valuable historical sites are the ones we completely abandoned.
Well, ones we threw away.
The ones we deemed worthless, set on fire, and left alone for nature to slowly digest, deconstruct, and repurpose. It forces us to look around at our own world today with a different perspective.
How so?
What massive modern eyesores, what abandoned industrial graveyards, what strip mines, dead shopping malls, or concrete wastelands sitting unused right now might quietly become the lush, protected wildlife sanctuaries of the 22nd century.
That's a crazy thought. So what does this all mean for us? Maybe it means we don't always have the final say on what our creations ultimately become. The next time you find yourself paddling a kayak on a quiet morning and you happen to look down into shallow water, remember that you might not just be looking at a reflection of the trees. You might be looking at the bones of a forgotten era, quietly finding a second, beautiful life beneath the surface.